The other thing was the air raids. You know, we used to get certain times during the war, there were a lot of air raids, and I can remember several kids that didn't show up one morning and never showed again at school because they, were killed. I can remember one German bomber dropped a stick of bombs, and one bomb killed a couple of horses in a field adjacent to the school, but the real tragedy was a second bomb landed right in the middle of our cricket table in the playing fields, which was really uncivilized. Fancy bombing a cricket table.
We wouldn't go to a bunker because they were far away, and many people did go. And then they stood there before they were let in. You couldn't just go in a bunker. You had to wait till there was a siren calling that you can go in now. It was called Vorwarnung. And then they went in. But we grabbed our stuff and went down to the cellar. We lived in the 4th floor when you say it in German. But here you would say the 5th floor. It was about 100 steps up to where we had our place. So we went to the basement, and then when a mine explodes, there's air pressure, it might be far, far away, and we still felt through all these doors in the cellar that there was one.
And all the public transport, all the windows were covered in a mesh. And they'd have a little tiny triangle in the middle there so you could see out.
Yeah, the mesh was stopped for flying glass when they were blown up.
Well, we had to do that on our own windows.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, we didn't do it, and twice my parents woke me up and told me to be careful how you get up because the bed would be covered with broken glass. Once when that landmine landed, another time we had a bomb quite near us, and it blew the windows in. Didn't wake me up, but my parents used to have to come in and wake me up and say, be careful, there's broken glass all over the place. And you couldn't get that repaired during the war. Broken window just got filled with a piece of plywood or cardboard or whatever you could find.
Cardboard, probably, because you couldn't get any building supplies.
There were two kinds of shelters given to homeowners. The name Anderson and Morrison were the names of a couple of politicians whose names got attached to these shelters. The Anderson shelter was made of corrugated iron. It was like a corrugated iron hut. You buried it into the ground partially, and you used the stuff you dug up to cover over the top. That was the Anderson shelter. Now the Morrison shelter was like a great big dining table built of steel with big 6-inch heavy angle iron legs, an angle iron base with what amounted to like a big bed spring all the way across it. The theory was this would be set up in one of the downstairs rooms in your house, bearing in mind that most English homes don't have a cellar anyway. So they'd set this up in the downstairs room, and the idea was everybody during a raid would dive under there. There were heavy, like iron grills used to hang around the outer edges, which would protect stuff coming in. Well, we have one of these in our house. I can remember the first time we tried to use it, my mother, who was of rather ample proportions, got stuck halfway in, halfway out. The raid was long gone and forgotten before we managed to dislodge her. And that was the last time we ever attempted to use it.
Well, we were in Berlin, and that was January, February, and then in April it really got bad with the airplanes, the bombers.
What year was that?
45. We were eating supper in the evening, and they always played marching music then. All of a sudden there came an announcement. Can I say it in German first? Achtung, Achtung, von Horizont, Verband schneller Kampfflugzeuge im Anflug auf Nordwestdeutschland. Der Verband befindet sich in dem Gebiet Anton Siegfried I. Weitere folgen auf der waagerechten Antonlinie. So they announced that English quick fighters flew toward northwest Germany and then to Berlin. Now at that time, I don't know how my father found out. They had put lines on the map with names like Anton Siegfried, Friedrich Gustav und sowas, and numbers. So we knew Berlin was Frederick Gustav. And when they came to directly our area, it was Frederick Gustav VII.
Depending on whereabouts you lived, of course, you either
Yeah.
headed for the shelters or you didn't. At school, if there was an air raid, they had semi-underground shelters, and if there was an air raid, all the classes used to have to go into these shelters.
North Road, we didn't have any shelters. You had to spend your time in the corridors.
Because the lights in the shelters were real bad, and the teacher would be one end and all kinds of hanky-panky would be going on the other
Is
end.
that right? I was at the primary school, and this stupid teacher told us this was air raid practice. All the boys go hide under the bushes, and all the girls had to crouch down in a little group so that we looked like big bunches of flowers. But if you went out at night, you'd have we called them torches, flashlights.
Yes.
That had a top on them, so it'd only point down.
Yeah, because you go out and there's no lights, no street lights, no lights coming out from adjacent windows. Everything would be black. Even the cars going by would only have a little tiny slit in their headlights with a shutter over the top of it to make sure that just a little tiny bit of light came out and went down to the ground.
But I remember they were saying if there was going to be a gas attack, it was either blowing whistles or ringing bells. And my mother couldn't remember what it was. And I think she must have heard somebody blowing whistles, because she grabbed me, she shoved my gas mask on, and she went running next door. If it had been a gas attack, she would have been dead, you know.
Yeah, everybody in England had a gas mask. They were obnoxious things. They were terrible
You had
things.
to carry them everywhere. And I was really mad. They had one that they used to call a Mickey Mouse one. It was for little kids. It was coloured. I was so upset because I was just a little bit too old. I wouldn't have a Mickey Mouse gas mask.
And then the last 6 weeks before the war ended, we lived in the cellar. So most important things like the electric stove went down the cellar, dishes and silverware and all this. We had a compartment in the cellar where you kept your coals and potatoes. And then there was an open area where people could bring chairs and sit. So grandfather put a bed down there where Renate Freimuth and I could sleep in the night. And then he had a small sofa for my mother, and he slept on boards on the coals with blankets.
Were there other families living down in the basement?
Yeah. Who would want to go upstairs? The roof wasn't then there anymore. The tiles had all flown away.
Was the 5th floor the top floor of the building?
Yeah. And if it rained, you had water in the apartment.
You moved downstairs because there were so many
It
bombs?
was safer, and because the air attacks came day and night.